The little girl had not spoken a single word in nearly 4 years. The world's most expensive specialists had failed. Award-winning therapists had quietly admitted defeat. Her billionaire father had exhausted every medical breakthrough money could buy. Then, during a crowded charity event held beneath the bright afternoon sun, a complete stranger did something so unbelievably simple that every person watching froze in stunned silence. The silent child slowly lifted her eyes, took 3 hesitant steps forward, and reached for his hand as if she had been waiting her entire life to find it. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel to become part of our growing family and community. The man everyone admired from a distance was called Graham Whitmore. He had built one of the largest technology companies in North America from nothing but relentless discipline and impossible dreams. Business magazines praised his brilliance, investors celebrated his courage, and newspapers called him a visionary. Yet none of those headlines ever showed the exhausted father sitting alone every afternoon inside the sunlit garden of his estate, hoping his daughter would simply look at him. Wealth had purchased magnificent homes, private aircraft, and entire companies, but it had never bought the one thing he wanted most. His 10-year-old daughter, Elodie, lived inside a quiet world where words never escaped and emotions rarely crossed her expression. She had not spoken since witnessing the tragic accident that claimed her mother's life during a family picnic years earlier. Every attempt to help her seemed to push her farther away. Doctors explained trauma. Therapists recommended patience. Teachers tried every modern approach imaginable. Nothing changed. The entire staff of Whitmore Estate adjusted their lives around Elodie's silence. Meals were prepared exactly the same way every day. Walkways remained peaceful because loud sounds caused her to retreat. Every afternoon she arranged tiny stones beside the garden fountain in perfect patterns before quietly returning to her favorite bench beneath an old maple tree. Graham watched from a respectful distance because every attempt to sit beside her usually ended with Elodie quietly walking away. The distance between father and daughter hurt more than any business failure ever could. Across the city, another parent faced a very different struggle. Colton Reeves had once served as a Navy SEAL. Years of dangerous missions had left scars that no one could see beneath his calm smile. After losing his wife to a sudden illness, he became the only parent to his cheerful 7-year-old son, Mason. Unlike Graham, Colton had little money. He worked as a youth outdoor instructor, teaching children confidence through nature walks, simple survival skills, and teamwork. His greatest lesson was never about knots or navigation. It was about making frightened people feel safe without forcing them to speak. People often assumed Colton possessed extraordinary strength because of his military background. The truth was almost the opposite. Losing his wife had taught him that true strength was gentleness. Mason became the center of his world, and every decision he made revolved around giving his son the loving childhood grief had almost stolen away. One bright spring afternoon, Graham's company organized a charity family festival supporting children's mental health. Hundreds gathered in the sunshine. Local organizations hosted games. Artists painted cheerful murals. Volunteers filled the park with laughter. Graham agreed to attend only because the event honored his late wife's lifelong dedication to children's emotional wellness. Elodie accompanied him, wearing her familiar pale blue sweater despite the warm weather. She ignored the crowds and quietly collected smooth pebbles near the edge of the lawn. Colton attended because his youth program had been invited to demonstrate outdoor confidence activities for children. Mason eagerly helped younger kids balance across wooden beams and solve playful teamwork challenges. Father and son laughed together, drawing smiles from everyone nearby. Several volunteers noticed Elodie sitting alone and gently encouraged children to invite her into games. Every invitation ended the same way. She lowered her head and remained perfectly still. Adults whispered sympathetically. Graham felt the familiar ache growing heavier with each passing minute. While carrying equipment across the field, Colton noticed something others had missed. He never focused on Elodie's silence. Instead, he watched the careful way she lined up stones according to shape, color, and texture. Her concentration reminded him of soldiers organizing gear before difficult missions, not because of fear, but because order created safety. He quietly asked Mason to continue helping the younger children while he walked toward the edge of the lawn. Several security guards instinctively stepped forward, recognizing the CEO's daughter. Graham nodded cautiously, allowing the stranger to approach. Everyone expected another attempt to start a conversation. Instead, Colton sat several feet away on the grass without facing Elodie directly. He reached into his pocket, gathered 3 small pine cones that had fallen from a nearby tree, and began arranging them beside several leaves and tiny stones. He never looked at her. He never smiled at her. He never asked a question. He simply created a second pattern beside hers. For nearly 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then Elodie glanced sideways. Colton quietly moved one stone exactly 1 inch. She studied it. He waited. Slowly, she reached over and corrected the placement, moving it back where she believed it belonged. Without speaking, Colton nodded once and rearranged another piece. For the first time in years, Elodie responded to another human being without withdrawing. The crowd never realized something extraordinary had already begun. Graham stood frozen. Therapists who had spent years analyzing complex treatment plans watched a former SEAL communicate through complete acceptance rather than instruction. Over the following weeks, Graham invited Colton to continue visiting the estate. He expected dramatic breakthroughs. Instead, Colton insisted nothing dramatic should happen at all. Every afternoon under the bright daylight, they quietly built tiny landscapes from stones, sticks, flowers, and leaves. Sometimes Mason joined them, happily inventing miniature villages while respecting Elodie's need for silence. No one demanded eye contact. No one celebrated tiny victories too loudly. No one pressured her to speak. Little by little, invisible walls began to crack. One afternoon, Elodie handed Mason a perfectly round stone before he could ask for it. Another afternoon, she smiled almost invisibly after Colton accidentally built a crooked bridge from twigs that immediately collapsed. Weeks later, she gently pushed another stone toward Graham. It was the first gift she had offered her father since her mother's passing. Graham nearly cried but remembered Colton's advice. Joy should never become pressure. So instead of embracing her or celebrating loudly, he simply accepted the stone with quiet gratitude and placed it carefully beside his own. For Elodie, that calm acceptance meant everything. Healing rarely announces itself with grand speeches. Sometimes it arrives disguised as patience. As months passed, Graham and Colton developed an unlikely friendship. The billionaire admired the veteran's humility. Colton admired Graham's willingness to learn despite decades of commanding boardrooms. Both fathers secretly believed the other possessed qualities they themselves lacked. Graham envied Colton's emotional wisdom. Colton admired Graham's relentless devotion despite endless disappointment. One afternoon during a community picnic held at a botanical garden filled with sunshine and blooming flowers, children participated in a simple scavenger hunt. Mason excitedly searched beneath bushes while Elodie quietly followed several steps behind. Suddenly Mason slipped on a grassy slope and scraped his knee. The injury was minor, but the frightened child burst into tears. Without hesitation, Elodie rushed toward him. Everyone stopped breathing. She gently brushed grass from Mason's sleeve exactly the way her mother once comforted her. Then something almost impossible happened. A tiny whisper escaped her lips. Only 2 words. "It's okay." The entire garden fell silent. Graham dropped the picnic basket he had been carrying. Colton closed his eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by gratitude. Mason looked at Elodie with innocent surprise before smiling through his tears. She had spoken. Not because someone demanded it. Not because therapy forced it. but because another hurting child needed comfort more than she feared using her voice. The days afterward were filled with cautious hope. Elodie did not suddenly become talkative. Some afternoons she remained completely silent. Other days she quietly answered simple questions with a few gentle words. Progress arrived unevenly, yet every tiny step felt meaningful because it belonged entirely to her. News eventually spread beyond the family. Journalists wanted interviews about miracle treatments. Medical experts requested research opportunities. Television producers offered documentaries. Graham politely declined every request. His daughter's healing was not entertainment. It was sacred. Instead, he established a foundation funding outdoor therapeutic programs for grieving children, placing Colton in charge of developing activities focused on trust, patience, and emotional safety. Families from every background began attending. Parents discovered that healing often began when children felt accepted exactly as they were instead of constantly reminded of what they lacked. Colton never claimed to possess special answers. During every workshop, he repeated the same lesson. Broken hearts do not always need louder voices. Sometimes they simply need quieter company. Years later, visitors entering the Whitmore Foundation headquarters always noticed one unusual sculpture standing beneath the afternoon sunlight in the central courtyard. It featured two unfinished circles of smooth stones slowly connecting together. Beneath it rested a simple inscription explaining that the strongest bridges are not built through force but through understanding. Employees often watched children gather around the sculpture, creating new patterns from colorful stones just as Elodie once had. Laughter replaced fear. Friendships formed without complicated introductions. Parents smiled through grateful tears as children discovered confidence one gentle moment at a time. Graham frequently stood nearby watching Elodie, now a confident young teenager, guiding younger children through the same quiet activities that had once rescued her from isolation. She still treasured peaceful moments, but her silence was no longer a prison. It had become a choice, balanced by growing courage and compassion. Colton watched beside his son, proud not because he had changed someone's life, but because he had remembered the simplest lesson hardship had ever taught him. People rarely heal because someone fixes them. They heal because someone stays long enough to remind them they were never beyond hope. Before this story comes to its close, we would love to hear from you. Please leave a meaningful comment sharing a moment when patience, kindness, or forgiveness changed someone's life, or perhaps even changed your own. Your words may become the encouragement another member of our community desperately needs today. As the warm afternoon sun settled gently across the garden where it had all begun, Elodie placed one final smooth stone into a circle beside her father, Colton, and Mason. The circle was complete at last. It was never about expensive treatments or impossible miracles. It was about one patient heart recognizing another, one grieving father trusting another, and one frightened little girl discovering that safety sometimes arrives through the smallest act of understanding. Graham finally realized that success had never been measured by company profits or towering buildings. The greatest achievement of his life was learning to meet his daughter where she was instead of desperately trying to pull her somewhere else. Colton understood that the battles truly worth fighting were not won with strength but with compassion. Mason grew up knowing that courage often looks like holding someone's hand without expecting anything in return. And Elodie carried forward the gift she had received, becoming a quiet light for children who believed they were invisible. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. May we all remember that sometimes one simple act of patience can succeed where every grand solution has failed, and that hope is often waiting silently for someone willing to sit beside it.